So, John, thank you very much for accepting this interview, which is for Czech Jethro Tull Fan Club. First question, tell us about your career before you joined Jethro Tull.
My career before joining Jethro Tull, it was very varied. It was playing in bands and with rock music and with jazz, both as a drummer and as a keyboard player. It was working in the world of theatre, dramatic theatre, composing music for plays, composing music for plays with music, musical theatre. But before that, it was playing in orchestras and symphony orchestras. I mean, I was classically trained at a music college here in Manchester in the UK, and I spent 4 years as an undergraduate, and then I did a fifth year as a postgraduate study, and that propelled me into a classical music career, working with ballet companies and orchestras. And luckily, I fell on my feet and I got a job working for the Ballet Rambert in London. And that was fantastic because we were doing contemporary music that had just been composed with fantastic contemporary dance. And then we were touring it around Europe, America, and around the world. So I was straight out of college. I'd fallen into a job. What luck could you have? So I was very lucky to do that.
So, you thought you did a quadrophony for the Who's you arranged. Can you imagine that at the same stage in your career you can do the same with Jethro Tull's To Rock and Roll Time to Die? It was a musical band.
Well, I mean, Ian and I have actually had those moments of those conversations where we've discussed some of the dramatic elements of Ian's catalogue of music. I invited Ian to come along to see Quadrophenia, but he told me he'd already booked tickets to go and see it all by himself. So he went along to see it, and actually it was in the very early stages of the production, and as you might expect, productions that go out on the road, they'll evolve and they'll change and they'll have a few little extra bits put in and a few bits taken away to try and hone the dramatic element of the piece to try and make it better. And that was the process that was happening when Ian went. So Ian enjoyed the evening, but also had some constructive criticisms as well. And I think he's taken a lot of that on board when he was thinking about certainly this evening's performance, when you think about putting Thick as a Brick Part 1 and Thick as a Brick Part 2, which is the new album, putting those two elements together as a piece of drama. Ian's no stranger to the world of theatre. He enjoys going to the theatre, so he's, as you'll know from past albums and from past tours, he'll always embrace that theatrical element. So he did come to see it. Quadrophenia was a fantastic thing for me to do. I had a fantastic time working with that company and working directly with Pete Townsend, who was very, very generous with his material and allowed me to put a little bit of my musicality into it and to alter certain sections to fit the drama that we were trying to create on stage. And Pete was very happy for that to happen. But we had a fantastic band and a fantastic company, and my only sorrow is that it's finished and that it's not on the road anymore, because it was very, very well received with Who fans. They really, really enjoyed it, and there's all that mod fraternity that follow that band around. And we'd go to a theatre, say for example in Birmingham in the UK, and we'd have 150 mopeds with all of the gear all driving past the front of the theatre on the opening night of that week, which was just an affirmation that they were enjoying the fact that that show was in town.
When did you first become aware of Ian Anderson's music? What was your first impression?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, I would have known Ian's music through seeing him on TV, hearing him on the radio, without necessarily being a fan or a follower of Jethro Tull. But I remember directly having to do a theatrical production very early on in my career, and I had to transcribe Bourrée. And I transcribed it for a small group of actors and a very poor flute player who tried to play it. But that was many, many years ago. But that was the very first moment that I came direct contact with Ian Anderson's music.
Okay, as the interview is for Czech Republic or Czech fans.
Yeah.
You have already played 12 gigs in Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm.
The first time it was in Brno in 2005 with 37 members of symphony orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find working with local orchestras as a very part of your touring life? And is this something you enjoy, and why?
Do I find it an important part?
Yeah.
Yes, I do find it an important part. I think I enjoy communicating with other musicians, and even especially musicians that don't speak your language, because you have a communal language of music, and especially being a conductor, the body language of music. I remember that concert very well, and I remember the little walk around the city of Brno as well, after some press interviews that we did.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed finding a little bit out about the city. But as I say, meeting other musicians and sharing this material, or any material to be truthful, with the musicians, and trying to encourage them to be as enthused as we are with the music, so as they will enjoy the concert as much as hopefully we will. It's a challenge sometimes. Sometimes you might come across musicians that don't know Jethro Tull's music and are just seeing it as another job. They might see, we've got to turn up for work. It's at 2:00, and then we do a show at 7:30. It's just work, and that's not the way that we make music. The music that we make it's our life. We live, eat, and breathe it. It is our hobby as well as our careers. So my major job is to enthuse the musicians of an orchestra into wanting to be involved in that. And there was a second half to the question. What was that? I can't remember.
Is this something you enjoy, and why the playing with orchestras?
Yes, well, I think I've probably covered that.
Yeah. After 4 years, you will play in Loket.
Say again? Yes,
Special
soon.
first place.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, thanks me. Do you have any new projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about at this stage?
Personal projects, I do. Over the last 10 years, I've been working for an opera company in South Wales, in Cardiff. It's the Welsh National Opera. And they've got a small section of the opera that commission new pieces, usually for to involve people in the community, to make opera be more open to people who wouldn't ordinarily want to go and see an opera. I've been commissioned 3 times already, and I've written 3 operas, all about half an hour long. One of them was made into a film. And another one I was very lucky, it went on tour, and it went to Washington and played at the Smithsonian Festival, I think last year, which is a real honour for me that one of my pieces was being taken abroad to represent the WNO, the Welsh National Opera. But this year, I'm working on a very special project, which is trying to discover, or trying to give a voice to members of our community that don't have voices, and those are people at 2 ends of a spectrum. One of the ends of the spectrum are young children who have severe physical and severe mental disabilities. So sometimes they have no way of vocally communicating. And we've discovered ways through music and through music therapy, myself and a poet I'm talking about, we've discovered ways of getting them to acknowledge music and enjoy, the obvious enjoyment of music, but also to interact with music, which has been incredibly powerful. And I've spent 2 weeks, working with these children in a class where we've been able to discover their personalities. The other end of the spectrum, and working with people who haven't got a voice, is working with people with dementia. And the big thing there is that as the disease of dementia gets progressively worse, they lose their voice and they sink back into their bodies. And what I've discovered by just being very close to somebody and maybe humming a hymn or humming a popular song that they would know from their youth, you get a little tiny recognition, maybe a tiny movement of the lips that they're trying to join in with you, and that is amazing. And so these two groups of people have been inspiring the poet and myself to write this piece, and it's half written so far, and I think we go into filming production for that in 2013.
Your work with Ian Anderson has been primarily in a support role.
In a supportive role, yes.
In a contrast to when you have been in a lead position.
Yes.
Do you find both roles equally satisfying?
Yes, I do. It's funny because I don't see it necessarily as a supportive role. I mean, being in the band is such a responsibility. If one of the musicians not falters, if one of the musicians wavers with a slight memory or a memory loss or whatever, it is has such an effect on the entire ensemble, and also Ian, because Ian is completely relying on the four musicians behind him to be as accurate as they can, both with the notes and the rhythms. The timing is crucial, the pitch, the intonation. So in that sense, I don't see it as supportive because, in a way, for example, with the flute has got to sit in a mix of musicians, in a mix of the band, and so it's almost that it's I know out front it will be louder, but it's almost that it is an equal, and it is an equal integral part in all of Ian's music. So I see both of those roles as equally satisfying. I mean, standing up and conducting an orchestra is still a lead and supportive role, because as we said earlier, it's my job is to try and pull all of the elements, the rock band and the orchestra, enthuse them all and make them all come together and play in unison. That can be tricky.
Can you give us an idea of what it was like in your latest recording of Figgers Brick 2 compared to recording Rupee's Dance?
Well, the two methods of recording were very different. Rupee's Dance, most of what Ian had recorded, either as a demo track or as a guide track, as we might call it, then became integrated into the final mix. And so he was basically then just adding elements in a multi-track situation into his music. So, for example, the accordion or a little bit of piano or whatever, they were added on. Thick as a Brick Part 2 was a very different recording process. We went into the studio as a band. Ian and I had scored the music. Ian had came to my house and he'd recorded some demos, and I had the audio files. And then with the audio files, I then transcribed the music into bars and notes and rhythms and chords. And with that material, we were able to print it out and give it to all of the band. And all of the band then had what we'd call a lead sheet, which had all of the information that they really needed to know to start sculpting what they were going to contribute to the album. So we rehearsed in the old-fashioned way. It was G minor, C, G minor, D. What do you want the bass to do? What should we do with the piano? And I invent something, and Ian would say, yeah, that works well. And Dave would play something on bass, and Scott would have something on the drums, and Florian would have something on guitar. And they'd all come together. We'd find out whether they worked together as a band. Then we'd move on to the next section. And once we'd rehearsed literally the whole album from the beginning to the end, and we'd made copious notes as to how we were to remember all of this information. We then continued in the same vein, but just kept pressing record. And then we recorded track by track in chronological order through the album.
So opening song of the Rupees Dance is called Under a Shade. The Cappuccino song is for Starbucks at the end.
Oh, really?
Dedicated.
Right.
It's for you as a coffee lover.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So in addition to spending many hours rehearsing, composing and touring, do you have any hobbies outside of music that you do in spare time?
Well, trying to stay healthy is a hobby of mine, and I suppose to aid that, I cycle. I have a bicycle, not a very expensive bicycle, but I enjoy cycling in my hometown, but cycling with gusto, with speed, to get a sweat, and I will cycle maybe for 2 hours, and that makes me feel good. It gets my heart pumping, and maybe makes me lose a little bit of weight, not too much. But that's my main hobby: cycling, walking, and spending time with my family. My family is getting old, and my son is 17. He's about to go to music college as a bass player. He's just got one of two places in a college in London, a music college in London. So we're very, very proud of him. So I've realised that I need to spend as much time with him now as possible, because he's going to be leaving home in a few months, which is quite a shock, having him been in the house for just over 17 years, and then he won't be around that much. So things move on. So that probably isn't a hobby, that's a passion.
Are your family critical on your music?
Yes. Well, my wife's a theatre director, a successful theatre director, and so she's always very critical about my compositions, and I'll often play material to her and ask for her opinion. And I think it's really useful for me, because she will see the dramatic element and understand whether it will work, whereas I might want to be maybe a little bit more obsessed with the minutiae of the music, and she can look at the bigger picture. So it's a good partnership.
You studied, as you told, you studied piano and drums. Afterwards, you spent 5 years as a professional drummer. What was the inspiration behind you switch to piano and accordion?
Well, work. I mean, it was work. It was. I was working in theatre, and I used to musically direct the theatre shows from the drums. But during the rehearsals, I'd be rehearsing with the actors and the singers from the piano. So I was always still doing that on the piano. But then when I went into performance, I go and sit behind the drums. I felt sometimes as though the drummer almost had more control, because he could establish what speed it was going to be, and he could say when it was going to start. But I graduated to starting to perform as a musical director from the piano. And realised that, I mean, that's a very powerful place to be, because obviously with the nod of the head or the shake of the hand as a conductor, the ensemble, if it's a good ensemble, will be with you, and that the acting company on stage will be with you too. But then I realised that I was getting more work as a pianist and as an accordionist, so I was earning more money doing that. So I thought I'd better do some more practice. So I just started practicing more accordion. And then subsequently Ian found out that he had an accordion player and a pianist that didn't live that far away from him, which was the beginning of my career and the beginning of that recording of Rupees Dance.
You appreciate Ian's music. Do his lyrics move you in the same way? So if so, which song is your particular?
Oh, well, I don't think I can really answer that question, because as you can imagine, there's so much material. There's certain lines of songs that just ring out to you and have a certain beauty in the poetry, and there's certain elements of the actual music that surrounds the lyric that you go, oh, this is just fantastic to do, and very enjoyable. So I prefer not to sort of say, this is my favourite or whatever, but, there's great things in music making for songs for Jeffrey and Pussy Willow. There's, from that, going way back in the back catalogue, that we used to do, that we used to play together, a few times that we used to play together, that I would say, yeah, I do enjoy those. But I have to say, Thick as a Brick Part 1 is fantastic fun to play as the organist. I mean, John Evans did an amazing job in recording that album. It is extraordinary. If you listen to the keyboard playing, it is extraordinarily high standard of music making. And John, who I met in Australia, he now lives in Australia. I was lucky enough to have breakfast with him last year when we toured to Australia. And he is a cyclist. He enjoys cycling as well, but he's he used to be a racing cyclist. I think he does an awful lot less now, but he was a cyclist, so we share a hobby.
I think he's a businessman.
Also,
yeah.
Yes.
So, the Czech Republic has a long classical music tradition. Have you been influenced by any Czech composers?
That's a tough question as well.
Sorry.
You see, the problem is, when you listen to composers, to music, you are influenced by so much stuff and you don't realise. So the answer to the question is yes, unfortunately. But I hope I'm not plagiarising. I hope I'm not stealing material from anybody, actually. But I think it's always very, very difficult when you're completely swamped with this. Today, you can access music from any country almost, be it folk music, be it classical music. Seemingly, you can access that through the internet, and it will go into your head, and it will sit somewhere, and then suddenly you'll find that you are influenced by it, and you don't realise it. I think a lot of composers find themselves in that situation. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at people like J.S. Bach or Mozart, they talk about being influenced by music by going to see concerts. That's the way that they used to find out about other composers, what they were doing. So they'd go and listen to concerts, hear a piece, be influenced by it, come home and write a piece of their own, having been influenced by the just freshly written composition that they've heard in the concert. So yeah, I'm influenced by all music.
Have you ever played Dvořákov, Smetana?
Yes, I have indeed. I was in the National Youth Orchestra of Wales, and when I was very small, when I was about 18 or 19, and we played some Smetana in one of the concerts.
So
and of course, everybody through the Western society knows Dvořák's material. It's sort of everybody knows that material.
You hold teaching position at Bath.
Yes.
And Bristol University. And
I do.
The Royal Welsh College. What is your specialism?
Well, at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, I go in and work with the acting students, basically musically directing musical theatre performances of, say, for example, Stephen Sondheim or that kind of material. But with the Bristol and Bath universities, my speciality is I teach classical percussion, contemporary percussion. So that's 4 mallet marimbas, 4 mallet vibraphones, and contemporary percussion. This year I've got 5 students at Bristol University, which is pretty hard work fitting them in while we've got nearly 100 concerts on the road with the band and all the travel. But the university have been very understanding, and I might land in England, and the following morning at 9 o'clock I'll be at university teaching. So it's a passion of mine because I enjoy sharing knowledge. I enjoy seeing those students develop, and at university the rate of development in a musician is very rapid. For example, I might have a student that doesn't have a 4 mallet technique on a marimba or a vibraphone when they come to me. and by the end of the first term, I've already got them holding four sticks and playing their first pieces. And by the end of the first year, they're playing a recital, a solo recital, using that technique. And that is a very rapid learning process, but that's so rewarding to see the young student just been responding so quickly to that new information.
Well, after a pre-run press conference you did in Brno in 2005, and you were very, very nervous from Stephen Sondheim.
Yes, yeah.
So how would you describe the main differences between Figures Brick 1 and Figures Brick 2?
The main differences? Well, I mean, as you might have noticed, there's a lot of choice of instrumentation that's carried through, so that's a similarity, that's not a difference. I think there's certainly a lot more poetry there's a lot more text, there's a lot more wordage in part 2, and less long stretches of instrumental. Figures Brick 1, as you know, has got big chunks of instrumental music that grows and develops and creates tensions and moves through the album. You'll discover in part 2 that you have elements of music that does come back, and in different shapes and different orchestrations, and that is a development of that musical material to create different textures and colours, with different themes, with different lyrical themes. So I think that's Ian's journey through using that almost classical composition technique of reusing material in a different form in a later part of the piece, and to recap the recapitulation. There's a piece right at the very end which is literally a recapitulation of themes that we've had all the way through the earlier part of Thick as a Brick Part 2, and at the very end we culminate with the whole lot.
So you live in nearby the area where Ian lives.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been to Wootton-based town?
I've driven through it several times.
Yeah.
Yes, so I know the High Street. I know exactly, and of course in the UK the topic that you're talking about, the bringing home of the troops, the repatrinisation of the troops, that is televised, was televised a great deal, and now Wootton Bassett has been given the title of a royal. It's now been given the royal status.
By the way, you lived many years in Manchester.
This being in Manchester today is fantastic because, well, it rained a little bit, but just being able to walk around and see some of the places that I used to play concerts or play gigs, and spend time with friends. So I'm very fond of Manchester.
So you're teaching at Bristol University. Were you in touch with Scott Hammond before he joined to the band, or not?
I knew of Scott.
Yeah.
I knew of Scott on the Bristol music scene. He's a respected musician in Bristol, but we had never worked together. So it was a joy to actually sort of meet him on that first rehearsal.
So final question. As you know, the Czech Republic is the home of lager. Do you prefer your beer on draw or in bottle?
Well, I suppose that depends upon where you're going to drink it. If you want to have a Czech Pilsner in England, then it's probably better to drink it out of the bottle. I would imagine. I'm not sure. You might want to correct me. But yes, it's used to be one of my favourite beers. But in England we have a dark beer called an ale, and it doesn't have as much carbonation, doesn't have as much bubbles in it. Some might say that it's flat beer. That is a very enjoyable drink, particularly here in Manchester. There's a couple of excellent breweries. There's a brew that I used to drink when I was a music student, far too much of it probably, which is a pint of Hyde's, which is a local brewery, and also a pint of Boddington's, which is also a local brewery. So that's a different kind of beer. But certainly when I come to Czech, I'll be looking for a Pilsner.
So it's like a Dawn.
Yes, yeah. Dawn and I are probably the same.
What about curry?
I am a big curry fan too.
Yeah?
Yep. And I cook curry for my family at home also. I usually like it hotter. My son and I both like it hot. But my daughter and my wife, they probably prefer it slightly less hot.
What about chicken tikka masala?
Yeah, well, that seems almost to be an English dish now. Chicken tikka masala, I don't think even exists in India.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's good
Thank
to
you.
talk to you.